Hey guys, Johnny Quirk back once again here to support your entrepreneurial journey. Okay, cool. So today I'm delighted to say that we have Bethany Wrede Peterson from Atelier Wrede and also the host of the Arrive podcast today on the line. Bethany, great to see you here.
Great to be here, Johnny. Thank you so much for having me on the Go Solo show.
No problem at all. And I'm really delighted to have you here today because, I think not only am I looking forward to our chat, and I think obviously you'll have an awful lot of stuff to share with other solo entrepreneurs, but, I'm really hoping this can be a great opportunity for me to learn about how we run our own podcast as well. I know you've been running your own one for a couple of years now.
Yes, I have, but you know what? It's funny. We were just saying before we started recording, there are always things that you're learning, no matter what side of the interview that you are on. And I think you guys are doing great so far.
Thank you. That's a good one. That's a good one. That set me up now for the whole hour, which is great. So, just obviously for everybody out there, for our new listeners, for our loyal visitors and listeners, obviously to the podcast and YouTube channel, in your own words, could you describe your business and exactly what it is that you do?
Absolutely. Yes. So I founded Atelier Wrede in, I want to say it was early 2019. Initially, it was an interior design studio for single men who were transitioning in their life and they wanted to recreate themselves in their bachelor pad, but like they didn't want the sort of stereotypical bachelor pad.
Yeah.
And fast forward to about 10 months later, I started my own podcast, Arrived.
Yeah.
And it was for interior design, it was for single guys, etc. But the whole business itself transitioned entirely once the pandemic hit. So I did a pandemic pivot and I moved my services entirely to now podcast coaching, podcast consultation, and personal brand messaging
Yeah.
for a number of reasons, which we can get into further. But I really found that in my own journey into podcasting, I just think this is such a fun medium, and I realized that it was something that was much more exciting for me to do. So now, what I actually do is I offer consultative services
Yeah.
to creative solopreneurs, small businesses, personal brands who
Yeah.
are looking to find their voice, not only in podcasting, but really, in their brand itself.
Yes.
So, we hear about personal brands a lot. So it's like when we have that voice, when we feel like we know our core messaging that's when our personal brand starts to come out. So that sort of is the long and the very short of what my business Atelier Wrede is all about.
Brilliant. And to be quite honest, just for everybody out there, we are going to dig into that later on with some of Bethany's top tips as well. Personal brand, on finding your own voice, and also obviously how to launch, run, and grow a podcast as well. So this is what I love about this show is that when I chat with different solo entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, everybody's kind of coming in at things of different angles. They've either got a number of different things going on, or they have one which they're fully laser focused on. Um, in essence, what is the actual kind of product you sell? I mean, is this on individual consultations like you mentioned, or is it retainer? Is it courses? Is it subscription based? I'm interested to know what that business model is and how you make your money as well.
Absolutely. I love that question. How do you make your money?
Sometimes it's easy to forget. I think we're in a good thing with this show is that most people who come on this show aren't venture capital backed or they aren't investor backed, so they're literally having to make cash every day
Yes.
to survive and grow their business.
Yeah, no, it's no, and I say that because I really do love that question. It is such an important question for all the reasons that you say.
Yeah,
We don't want to be creating hobby businesses.
yeah,
So yes, the way that my business model, what I should say, is kind of three pronged.
yeah,
Of course, I have my freebie, my lead magnet,
yeah,
which I think your listeners probably know what that is. And then the sort of initial offering that I have is an 8-week podcast and personal brand launch course.
yes,
So it's very heavily rooted in how you go from zero to podcast launch without knowing any of, the shop talk on how to
yeah,
create your podcast. But also within that 8 weeks, it talks all about, finding your voice, as it were. We dig deep into personal brand messaging, etc. So that is completely self-paced, self-study. I'll pop into the course on occasion to answer questions, but it's
mm,
really much more of an independent offering.
yes,
And that's for someone who is, maybe not at the point yet where, they have the accessibility to work with me one-to-one. And then where I move up from that model is a strategy day. It's 3 sessions in which I'm literally working and consulting one-to-one with my clients, with my students. And it's less about, again, the mechanics of the podcast itself, because all of that is scalable information that you can learn once, you can take the course, et cetera. But really, when I'm working with students and my clients one-to-one, it's like we're working together to workshop their own messaging. And then they get the course, the podcast course with that.
Yep.
Yeah. And then and I haven't launched it yet, but you mentioned a retainer model, and I'm noticing that's becoming more and more important in consultative services.
Yes.
So that is something that I need to work out the mechanics on myself, but that should be launching sort of mid 2021. And that is, yes, it's going to be a retainer model whereby someone who's done a consult with me, or they buy, let's say, a package of consults, really has access to me throughout, let's say, the year, right? Because we all know we have an amazing consultative session or strategy day with someone, and then we're left to our own devices. So it's really, again, to sort of help those clients meet them where they're at.
It sounds like you almost have that perfect funnel there then, in terms of, like you said, you have your lead gen, you have your top of funnel really, which is attracting your audience. The middle bit is probably the scalable stuff. It's the less one time only, maybe, to create courses or content, maybe not one time only, but it's more maintenance. And then at the bottom, like you said, it's more about kind of personal relationships. It's about value. It's about your time. It's actually building that. But like you said, consultation stuff is kind of coming, and some kind of retainer model in there as well. So kind of leads me on to this next question, hopefully quite well, which is, where did the whole passion come from? I mean, where did you see the opportunity to set up this business from?
Absolutely. Yes. And actually, can I just say one more thing about this, which I think about that sort of menu of services, or that value ladder, which I think is so important for any business owner out there, but especially solopreneurs, right? The one thing that I would say is about my business model and the services, I should say, that took a lot of time, right? This doesn't happen overnight. Like, it took a lot of trial and error to get this right.
Yeah.
But my core consumer, or my core client, has the same problem. How do I create a podcast? How do I find my voice, right? So wherever you're coming in on that sort of the funnel or that value ladder, it's the same. It's not necessarily the same person, but they all have the same problem. And I think that's sometimes where we as small business owners and solopreneurs can get it wrong. So it takes a lot of tweaks, but I think that's really important, just to know that you're offering one value.
I like what you're saying. It's almost like you have a broad niche, in terms of like, you're very focused on actually what it is you're trying to solve and what you can offer, but hopefully it's also appealing to the widest possible audience who are in that same boat as well.
Yes. Or like or it's maybe it is a niche, and it isn't a kind of an avatar or a persona.
Yeah.
But yes, like that problem that you are solving is the same and consistent, no matter the vehicle, let's say, by which you're working with that client.
Of course.
Yeah. And then to answer your question on how did I fall into,
I mean, where did it come from? Where did you start and just go, one day I'm going to do this with my life?
Yeah. You know what? That came about, that I totally fell into. I had no intention of becoming a podcast coach. Like, literally, it wasn't even my idea.
Oh, right. Well, the truth comes out now, everybody. It's like,
no, it wasn't even my idea. I had a dear friend who was actually, the 7th guest, or no, it was episode 7 on my show, Arrived. He came onto my show. We had a great time. He became a loyal listener to the show. He's also an interior designer. And he approached me, I want to say like January of 2020, right? So none of us knew this pandemic was even a thing.
Yeah.
And he said, look, Bethany, I love your podcast. I love your message.
Yeah.
I love what you're doing. Will you help me launch my podcast and help me find my voice, as it were?
Yes.
And Jonny, I was like, no, I will not do that, because I didn't know what I was doing, right? Like, I had just cobbled this thing together from, YouTube videos, like watching Tim Ferriss videos on podcasting. Like, I did all the things that I think a lot of solopreneurs do when they're not at a point where maybe they can even afford a course, or maybe they don't even know that courses are out there yet when it comes to these things. And so initially I turned him down.
Yeah.
And yeah, kind of for that reason, but also because I did have this sense of imposter syndrome
Yeah.
and really did have that sense of self-doubt of, well, could I teach this to someone?
Yes.
And, of course, then, like all businesses sort of dried up, but especially in interior design for a while, because it was like no one wants anyone in their home.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're in the middle of a pandemic. And so I actually contacted my friend back and I said, hey, is that offer still on the table? Because I
Yes.
think I'm ready to work with you now. And
And was
really
it?
just,
I
yeah, go
don't know. He
ahead.
was ready and waiting, though. He was ready and waiting for you. Were you able to help him?
Yes. Remarkably, I was.
Yeah, he wasn't just like, I've gone with a big gun here. We've got it all sorted. Episode 15 is out next week.
No, yeah, no. He, yeah, thankfully, that's an interesting question. Actually, I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, thankfully, he was, because he was at a point too where he was reeling, because like I mentioned, he was also an interior designer. And of course, all of
Yeah.
his
Yeah.
business dried up as well. So he was like, yes, let's do this. He's like, I have to iterate the next level of my business.
Mm.
And I want to do that with a podcast. So it really was serendipitous, Jonny, in the sense that, yeah, it was like the timing was right. And from that first client, and thankfully, he was a friend. And I think sometimes we think like, well, if they're a friend, I can't take their money, or
Yeah.
I'm not going to, like that relationship can feel skewed.
Yeah.
But thankfully, my friend Aaron was very much like, no, I want to pay you and I want to pay you well because I value
Yeah.
what you've built off of, your blood, sweat, and tears.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course.
And so then thankfully more clients sort of came out of the woodwork, initially from my business coaching group who had been
Yeah.
loyal listeners of the show as well. And that point, it's like, I think when I got to about, I don't know, May, June of 2020,
Yeah.
I started thinking, you know what? I really like this.
Yeah.
I'm really excited by how I'm actually helping people find their own voice, as it were,
Mm.
but seeing that transformation for my
Yeah.
clients in the way that I personally, whilst I love interior design, I was so burned out by it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this way, I mean, this one-to-one consultation, this course creation business model is a game changer.
Well, this is actually the next question. This is brilliant. I might even need to ask any questions here today, but as well, you're leading on the perfect segue every time. Is, obviously interior design has been something which has been a major passion for a long time. Like
Yes.
where do you see that balance? I mean, this seems like an opportunity, let's call it that came out of COVID. And obviously, like you said, you're loving what you're doing. Where does that balance come in? Or do you think you've almost transcended that kind of one-to-one relationship of that? Will you want to go back into interior design for special projects and the likes and keep this running in the background? How do you see yourself going forward in terms of balancing everything?
That's a really good question. Yeah. So for a while, I was thinking I wanted to do both.
Yeah.
Because I realized that, and actually in my business model for interior design for the single guys was actually very similar to the model that I just discussed for, my own existing business.
Yes.
In that I had the lead magnet, that I had I was going to create a course, and then I had the one-to-one. I wasn't actually taking projects from concept to completion anymore.
Yep.
And for a while I had that sort of thing that I was like, I can do both. Right.
Mm.
But ultimately I found personally, it wasn't my passion any further. Like I loved working for these amazing luxury design houses in London. It was an amazing learning experience. I know, right? Like I mean, some of the stories I could tell you, which go beyond the scope of this episode, right? I mean, it was so fun, but to do this on my own, I just realized actually I was having a lot more fun working as a podcast coach, and I was seeing that transformation. So I actually felt like it was muddling my core messaging, because I was doing this thing where it was like, oh, I help single men find their voice at home, and I help solopreneurs find their voice in their business. And I don't know, maybe it translated in my marketing, but I felt like the message was kind of muddled personally. And so I actually, after 40 episodes of my own show, wrapped up what I called season 1. It was never meant to be a seasonal show, but I was just like, you know what? I want to transition my message here because I no longer want to work in interior design. So why am I promoting this? And I moved the scope of the show completely over into more this sort of like intellectualized finding your voice versus like spatially finding your voice at home, etc. And I realized it's because I didn't feel like my own story was being interpreted, let's say, or my own narrative was being interpreted
Yeah.
in my own business. I felt more and more like each episode that I was putting out for the podcast for single guys, or each project that I was taking on, felt to be more and more like a research project, right? Like I was reading GQ and I was reading Esquire and I was like trying to like read all this, gentleman's literature, etc.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I felt like my voice isn't in any of this. Like, I don't know how to speak to these guys on a level that I know how to speak to someone who's literally been in my position before, where it's like, how do I start a podcast? I don't know what to say, etc. So that's a very long-winded answer about no longer being in the design industry.
But I think it's kind of true though, in terms of what you're saying. I mean, like it seemed like, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you were going maybe through the motions of the other one. You were doing what you felt was maybe the right thing. You wanted to do something on a deeper meaning in terms of, say, season 2.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. That's the thing. And it's one of the core sort of tenets that I teach my students and my clients is that, yes, of course, it's about our following. It's about our audience. It's about our clients, right? It's not really about us at the end of the day, to use the Donald Miller term, right? Like our customers are the hero and we're just the guide.
Yeah.
And at the same time, if we feel like we get to a point where what we're doing is just simply too convoluted or too complicated or doesn't fulfill us, then we're never going to be able to show up for our students, clients, customers, because we have to have an active message. We have to have an active passion and a purpose. And I just felt like my purpose was moving further and further away from my initial male audience and moving more towards, and I should say in design, and moving more towards podcasting and brand messaging.
And I think what's really strong there is that, it's never too late or too early to start looking about everything that you do, have an audit of all of the reasons you're putting stuff out there. You almost like have a refit. I mean, how many times have things been rebooted and it's a completely different theme or different vibe or whatever? You've got to make sure that you can feel comfortable doing that. Is that what you'd say?
Absolutely. And, sometimes I think that it's so interesting. I had someone on my show recently who calls herself a multi-hyphenate creative.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think that we as small business owners, we have a lot of different passions. And sometimes I think we will say to ourselves, well, how do I translate this? Or do I seem uncommitted? Or do I seem like I'm all over the board, right? Yeah. If I'm transitioning from this quote unquote career to another. And actually, I think if there's a way in which we can translate that message from one, let's say, industry over into another, it's a lot less confusing for our audience than we think. But we sometimes just have to connect the dots ourselves in that respect and not have that sense of self-doubt.
And I think in terms of that, a lot of themes coming up, like you said, self-doubt, it's imposter syndrome, literally most solo entrepreneurs find this because I think especially in those early days, months, years, as they're just kicking off, things like confidence in what you're doing. Are you doing the right thing? You're reading about it in books, researching on YouTube, but are you still making progress? Are you making enough money to pay the bills? Are you feeling like you're going somewhere? But it seems obviously like that work compounds itself to show the way forward. And it kind of leads me on to this final question really of part one, which I always ask, like, do you think you could ever go back to a salaried position now in terms of now you've had a taste of entrepreneurship? Are you a hired gun potentially if just one big gig comes along? I'm interested to know where, like have now you've had a taste of entrepreneurship, whether this is it now forever.
Oh man.
And I don't have a blank checkbook here as well. I don't say like Louis Vuitton here. We're gonna.
It's, I've been a salaried employee, and I never liked it. Here's the other thing, right? I mean, it's sometimes I think the situation really just depends on where you're at.
Yeah.
And your personal circumstance. I've always felt like I have been terminally unemployable. if I am totally honest.
It's true though. I think a lot of creative people are, I'm the same.
Yeah. But I mean, there is something that is amazing about knowing you're in something together with a team,
Yeah.
for sure, especially if you're a solopreneur, right? Like that's something I miss,
Yeah.
is having that sort of, collaborative back and forth every single day. And would I ever go back? I think, man, I think the role would just have to be so right? Like I would
Yeah.
have to be like literally a gun for hire in a company that I really believed in,
Mm.
leading, let's say, their like podcast marketing division, right? Like
Yeah.
it would have to be something that completely aligned with my goals, and I would have to have a lot of creative freedom.
Yeah.
And I think it's like the more creative freedom we want, the more we realize that we want to go it alone, not alone, but like we want to be enterprising and we want to have our own businesses.
We do.
So yeah, I don't know. It's like once you get the taste, it's
Yeah.
like, I don't know. Can you go back?
I find, I always ask this question. It's always interesting from people. I think, like I said, some people are so laser focused on what they're doing. It's just like, look, I might not be making any money, but I'm so focused on what I'm doing. I know there's an end result, which is great. Or some people are quite flexible and fluid. They're saying, well, I can do 20 hours a week on this or 25 hours a week on this, but it still leaves 10 or 15 hours to do some side hustle work. Or I could potentially, take a freelance gig that's well paid for 3 to 6 months. And that's going to turbocharge my own business forward because I can do that sort of stuff at night. So I don't think there's any one size fits all rule for everybody. But I like what you were saying, really. It's about life situation and kind of where you are at that stage as well.
Absolutely. And actually you make such a good point, right? I mean, it doesn't have to be this all or nothing. You don't have to be, let's say, full-time salaried,
Yeah.
W-2 as we call them here in the US, or be 100%, on your own, doing your own thing, an LLC or a limited company, whatever.
Yeah.
You can do both, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, like you're saying, you can work for another company, another organization, 10, 20 hours a week. And maybe you're a part-time employee, and then, they're giving you that flexibility, thankfully, to go and do your own thing.
Yeah.
Having what Marie Forleo calls, what she calls a bridge job, right? So when you're first starting out as an entrepreneur, and like, let's be honest, like revenue and income sometimes isn't always there.
Yeah.
So actually having these bridge jobs, whether it's consulting for another, let's say, studio, or maybe it's working at a restaurant, as I was doing actually for a while when I first started out, just to get my podcast editing services covered, right? It's like, there is no one size fits all. And I think another important point to make, there is that we don't have to go from like zero to amazing revenue overnight. It probably won't happen. And to have more of a hybrid model of your employment, or like how you're making your money, right, is no bad thing, and it's no failure.
I mean, we're all looking for a sustainable lifestyle as well. It's, unless, like you said, unless 5 million or 1 million or 500,000, whatever, is going to land on your doorstep every month or something. It's about building a lifestyle at the end of the day. Why do we do it? Obviously, we do our work because we enjoy it, but it's also got to be something which fits in with how we want to live our lives. And obviously, we all have different reasons about why we're here and what we're trying to do as well. You don't want to get me off on some philosophical stuff here, Bethany, as well. I don't want to be writing one of my opinion blogs here as well. Right. Well, this is a perfect opportunity because this is the section in our Go Solo show where we ask our solopreneurs who come on this show to share some of their top tips, some actual genuine, insightful stuff that, some of our listeners can use for their own businesses. So personal brand is such a strong thing. And I'm just wondering if you could give a few tips and a bit of advice really about how somebody can, well, first off, maybe what personal brand means to you, but also some tips on how somebody can develop that. And obviously their reputation, I guess, which is all kind of bundled up in that.
Yes. I think the term personal brand is very scary for a lot of entrepreneurs starting out, because when we think about personal brands, we think about Richard Branson, or we think of like, oh God, what is her, like Kanye West's wife, or now ex-wife, Kim Kardashian. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Everyone is laughing at me like, how do you not know Kim Kardashian?
Yesterday's news.
Yeah, I know. But it's like, we think about these sort of like A-list personal brands, right? And we think that like, that's mega. Like, how could I be this personal brand? When really a personal brand in my estimation, is simply about taking a stand, realizing what you believe in, what your purpose is, how you want to help transform
Yeah.
your customers, consumers, clients, students, etc., and then going for it, right? And not feeling afraid to speak your mind in the service of others. So it's this combination of getting really clear on what you stand for, what
Yeah.
your life's philosophy is, and then taking your message and spreading it far and wide. Because, the thing is like, I'm a podcast coach, but there's like a million podcast coaches out there, right? But what I'm doing is a little bit different to the podcast coach, let's say next door, right?
Yeah.
And so we don't need to worry so much about comparing ourselves or thinking like, well, I won't be the level of this personal brand of like, I don't know, Mel Robbins, right? Like she's one of my absolute heroes. We just need to show up, really hone in on what is our core messaging, what we believe in, and then use that to start helping people.
Wow, this is I can see this is already going to be some of the headline for our blog that we make out of this podcast as well. But that's amazing advice, and again, so well delivered. Which again kind of leads me now onto this next thing. And I'd be honest with you, Bethany, I grabbed this directly from your website, so this is on you here. So explain to me. So you say you're going to help me find my voice, tell my story, and create space for what matters. Tell me what that is, and obviously how that like if I was interested, how I could do that.
Yes. So it really goes back to, so when I say finding your voice, part of that is really just figuring out where to find that courage to be outspoken, right? And to feel like you can really step up to the mic, whether it is a podcast, whether it's a blog, whether it's, social media, microblogs, IGTV series, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And really just learning and realizing that you have a voice, it deserves to be heard. And part of that voice is in telling your story. Again, I mentioned that I got to the point with the niche of single men where I was like, this is a research project. Like, I don't know what I'm saying. I don't feel like my story is relevant to them.
Yeah.
And so when I then realized like, okay, I got to tell my story, like that's exactly what I mean there. And then telling your story in such a way that, again, it's helping your listenership, or it's helping your target market. And I think there's a way to do that in which we can talk about ourselves, but make it about and in service to our audience.
Yeah.
And when I say create space for what matters, I guess that's a little bit of a hangover from the interior design days, but creating space can really be much more, let's say, metaphorical or abstract, right? So thinking instead about like, well, I have to do all these social media posts, or I have to put out podcast episode after podcast episode, week on week and week. It's like, well, creates like, how do you go back and do a 40,000 foot view on what is right for you and your business? Like that's how you create space. And sometimes creating space can even be doing nothing, right? Like I had this amazing podcast guest, Andrew Smart, on the show, who wrote this amazing book on like how your brain sometimes like needs to do nothing. And so it's like creating space can be used in so many different respects. So those are the sort of like the three tenets that I like to work with, whether it's my students or my clients, rather than something that's more rote and formulaic.
Yeah. And I think
so individual.
Oh, massively. And but I think picking up on the word metaphor there, I think that is so strong as well, because in terms of finding their voice, it's so important, especially if you're a solopreneur or a small business owner. People buy from people. So it's very, very important that somebody's able to get their message across easily. And like you said, whether that's on a podcast format, Instagram TV, whatever, it has to be something where people come across as natural and believable and trustworthy if you're going to part with your paycheck to buy something from them. I think obviously the story is so important as well. We're working with a number of people at Subkit here, to obviously help launch their brands and businesses. I know we're a people-led business. We're working with a guy who's from Paris, who's running a wine club. His story. Excellent. I'm matching my t-shirt here, everybody. You might have to see it if you listen to the podcast, but a cat has just joined. I'm wearing a cat t-shirt. That's a good bit of blend there. But in terms of that, like the Parisian guy working with who's launching his wine club, there is an amazing story. A guy who retrained, got a lot of knowledge of wine, wants to share this with the world. So I think that's a believable buy-in story as well. And creating space is so important as well. I think we're chatting with a guy recently, and we were talking about social media channels, and he's saying, I want to be across all of them, or I don't want to be on some of them, or whatever. And again, like you said, it's so important just to make sure that, I guess, you're doubling down on areas which will have an impact for you, but then you've got enough space not to worry about all the other ones. Maybe do your research and then keep space in your diary each week so as you can breathe and think about strategy as well.
Absolutely. Yes, we sometimes, and I think as solopreneurs, and we get all this amazing advice about, you can show up here and on this platform and on this platform and whatever. And it's like, that's wonderful. But the last time I checked, like, I'm not an octopus. I have like 2 arms. I can only do so much at once. And so it's about really figuring out what works for you. Yeah. And like figuring out what's important for you, what that message is, because
and I guess it could be a vicious circle as well, because, if you try to spread yourself too thinly, if you have to hire more people to cover those bases, then you're going to be spending the money you earn on there. Where actually, if you were just very laser focused and streamlined on doing your own enterprise, like an agile way, then obviously it's a sustainable business you can grow. As and when you need to take on employees, you can do that, but there's no fat on it if you will do. You can be quite lean in terms of running your business, doing the core things which are going to generate income. Number one thing, solopreneurs out there, very, very important, as we talked off for this before. But it's so important. And podcasting is so hot right now. I mean, it's been hot for many years. You mentioned Tim Ferriss, been a big fan for years reading his books, but again, his podcast's been going for many years now. If I was thinking a podcast was right for my business, and I'm putting myself here as a solopreneur who's just thinking it's a great avenue, what advice would you give to them before they embarked on launching a podcast? What sort of preparation work do you think they should do first?
Absolutely. Great question. There's so much prep work, but actually sometimes I think that we can overcomplicate things.
Yeah.
Not to say, right? Like putting out a podcast can be a lot of work, right?
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that I would say right off the bat is don't try to be a Tim Ferriss, right? He's got a team of people behind him and has for many, many years. Yeah. I think one of the biggest questions that I receive from students is, oh man, if I have a podcast, now I need to be doing this weekly for the rest of my life. And it's like, no, you don't have to. There are so many different ways in which you can have a podcast. You can do it weekly if that's your jam. You can do it seasonally and take some time off. You can even do a limited series that's like 5 episodes or it's 10 episodes and that's it. And then you dip your toe in the water. So when we talk about, again, like having all these different marketing aspects, and you're right, podcasting is huge for marketing right now. The first thing I would say to someone is don't feel like it needs to be something that you're going to be married to for the next 30 years. You can see if it's right for you. Yeah. And then, aside from that, I'd say the honestly, Jonny, the biggest piece of advice that I would say is make sure your content is damn good. Yeah. Because if you really focus on your listenership, and like really know what is keeping them up at night. What are the burning questions that they have? How do I know my core audience inside and out, and then create content for them that is literally getting between their ears, speaking to them? That is going to build your show, and that is going to build the know, like, and trust factor for them to want to then move to the next stage in that funnel, as it were, which is to say, hey, I really want to work with this person because they get me. Yeah.
Real life persona work in play before you actually kind of launch it as well.
Yes.
And like you said, I guess, having quality, having a reason for doing it, having, actionable, again, we don't hold ourselves in, mega high regard here and say this is, pure gold. I'm hoping there's lots of gold in this show, but, we try and make it, worthwhile. This is why we ask entrepreneurs who are in the trenches doing it themselves. We don't want to just make this a call and an interview about theory. We actually want to
Mhm.
hear about people who are actually doing stuff in their business as well. And
Yes.
I guess, how would you track value as well of the podcast? I mean, obviously you said it's a great way to market your business, but how do you track that kind of value, and how do you get the most return out of a podcast if you put it out there?
Yes. So the other thing I would say there too is I would say manage your expectations on a
Mm,
podcast. If you're doing, let's say, a weekly, or if it's something that you are quite committed to, if it's the medium for you and you know that,
yeah,
manage your expectations. Because I remember getting something like 18 episodes in
yeah,
and going to like, saying to my business coach, why don't I have all these, single guys knocking down my door yet to work with me on their design studio
yeah.
or on their homes? And my business coach, who's a podcaster herself, was like, yeah, because that's not how it works. Like,
Mm,
you're building a body of content and it's a long game.
yeah.
And I know that's not the sexiest answer,
But it's
but
true
it
though.
it is true.
Yeah,
But that doesn't mean it's not completely worthwhile.
yeah.
And I would say, in terms of gauging a sense of value, or like, how can you gauge your return, is what I think you're asking me. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
yeah, and also maybe the distribution. Like how would you get it out to market to actually, yeah, like you said, gauge
Mhm.
return, but also probably get it out there to as most amount of people as possible.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, what's so nice about, from on the more of the technical side of that question, what's really nice now is that we can work with podcast distribution platforms, hosting sites. I use the term interchangeably.
Yeah,
Like Anchor is owned by Spotify. There's a big one called Libsyn. Acast, I know, is huge
yeah,
in the UK and across Europe. Thankfully, they do a lot of that work for us, and they'll
yeah.
distribute our podcast. We upload it once to
Mm,
their server, and they distribute it for us across 10 plus platforms.
yeah,
And then you can manually distribute it yourself. It doesn't take as much time as we might think. But so I mean, yeah, like that's one way to really get your pod and your message out there in a way that isn't as I suppose onerous as we might think it would be.
yeah,
And then one of the great ways that you can actually gauge a return on your investment, let's say with a podcast, or use your podcast a little bit more like a lead magnet,
yeah,
because of course we know that you don't have to enter in your personal information or your email to listen to podcasts, which is that
yeah.
free
Just
content.
roll and go. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. But one of the great things that someone out there who is thinking about starting a pod could do is to put, let's say you have an episode on I don't know, we'll use like work from home spaces, right? So we'll just go back to design
yeah,
for a second. Like, you could do an episode on, or if I did an episode on, 10 ways in which you can work from home and still be productive, right?
yeah,
You could then say, hey, and if you want to download my free guide to this, go here, and you can run it like a small lead magnet. And then
yeah,
you can really track the metrics of who is coming and taking that action and getting on your list, your email list,
yeah.
based upon your podcast as well.
Okay, cool. Because I think
Yeah.
this is something which obviously the delivery of it is so important, really. It's like, how can you get it to the widest possible audience? And
Hmm.
obviously you can put it up on, on the different services. Obviously we do this ourselves, but it's also trying to get that in front of people as well. Like it's this is why we have the YouTube channel. This is why we share on our
Yes.
social channels as well. I guess what I like about podcasts as well is that, if you're starting to make inroads by episode 30, 40, 50, people
Hmm.
will still go back and listen to episodes 1, 2, and 3. So the work you're putting in is almost like evergreen, that people will catch up to your
Yes.
earlier episodes, even if it was uh, you know, a low listing figure early on as well.
Absolutely. No, that makes such complete sense. You're right. You hit the nail on the head. It's evergreen content.
Yeah,
And, assuming your content is that you're putting out there, isn't about, let's say, politics or current events, you're
yeah,
right. That content can be in someone's ears 5 years from now, and
yeah,
it can
yeah,
have just as much value and meaning, and yeah, just a high value for them. And
yeah,
it's so funny. I mean, it's like, I actually buy so many services from first listening to podcasts.
yeah,
I'll like binge maybe 3, 4 episodes. And then by that time, it's like how I found my dog trainer, how I found a lot of different things. Right.
yeah,
And so we do know it is a model that works, but yes, you're right there. It is not something that it's a one and done. You
yeah,
do have to be committed to at least a few episodes. Right.
yeah,
But yes, it is amazing. And then the other thing too, I would say, is sometimes our monetization, right, doesn't come in the way in which we think it's going to. So I started the pod thinking that I would get more interior design clients from it, but actually the monetization from my pod has come from now me being a podcast coach. So it's like putting that out there in the world
Yeah.
and expecting that and having that expectation of one result isn't always the way it works, but it can come totally full circle and
Yeah.
benefit you in another way that you didn't even anticipate.
Yeah, and I think as well, like our mutual friend Richard as well from 11 Content, I remember talking with him about, source content as well. And I guess a podcast is as source content as it comes. You can pick out tips, you can pick out advice, you can turn it into a blog like we do, like quotes, social, video, there's all sorts of things that can come from that. And like you said, unless you're putting yourself out there and actually doing it, then who knows where it's going to go. But I guess it's when you stop doing innovative things as a business, not putting yourself out there, that's when you've got to worry about where the next customers are going to come from as well.
Yes, exactly. I remember Richard saying in that episode, he said, I think he used the word like you sweat the episode, which I was like, oh, that is such brilliant phraseology. Because yeah, you're right. Like you talked about, all the different ways that you can repurpose that content, just like you're saying. And yeah, go back. Was it episode 7? I don't know. I don't remember what episode it was.
Wow,
it was
we
amazing.
have a fan here, people. It's just like...
I'm like, guys, go back and listen to episode 7 with Richard Lucas.
Yeah. No, Richard's a smart guy. He's got a hell of a lot of good tips for marketing content. But you're right. I mean, that's it. You do want to sweat it, a bit like what you just said, what people see right now is an hour-long YouTube video or podcast that we put on. But actually, there's the preparation that goes into it. There's the editing afterwards. There's actually making sure, that we're uploading it, making sure that work's done, but then also turning it into different assets as well. 1 hour of content might turn into 10 or 15 hours of preparation and post-care work as well. But, you may as well put the effort in. There's no point in just sticking it on YouTube and hoping for the best as well.
Right. That's a really good point. That's such a good point. A lot of the times I think, again, yeah, it's like we think, well, we've done it. We've launched the pod. And it's like, yeah, you've just got to the starting line. I hate to say it. I had to learn that one the hard way. Yeah. But it's all about exactly what you're saying, where you're not only distributing it to different channels, but like how you are making that asset work hard for you. But what's so beautiful about podcasting and these conversations is it's so organic. Yeah. And you're right. Like you can take so much of any of your podcast episodes that probably come quite naturally to someone who wants to be a podcaster, right? And you can repurpose that content. So I think that's a genius reminder.
Brilliant. And to be quite honest, it's true. I will be doing that when I'm doing my usual Friday morning editing. Honestly, it's one of the highlights of my week. I have a pot of coffee, I have some good music on, and that's when I start getting into some of the editing as well, which is quite nice. It's quite cathartic to sit down and have that time to do it. I quite like these kind of tasks as well. Right, we're moving on to our rapid fire round. And obviously being a listener to the show yourself already, you can know this can be as rapid as you want, or you can add a little bit of flavor to each question that I ask. So please do. Let me put you on the spot, Bethany. Who are your favorite entrepreneurs in life and why?
Yeah, I love that question. So you've heard me say a few different times now, I didn't find what I was doing fun anymore. I felt burned out by it. And I think one of the biggest, or sort of like the biggest role models, I suppose, for me from very much afar, that's helped with that philosophy on my end is Richard Branson. And one of the things that I know it's such a cliche thing to say, right? Yeah. But Richard Branson has had such a wonderful mindset insofar as saying, hey, you know what? If what I'm doing is no longer fun, if it's not serving me, move on and go somewhere else, right? And that's not to say that the second it gets difficult and it's not fun that day, that you should move on. Yeah. But I love Richard Branson because he's just like, screw it. If it's not fun anymore, go do something else.
All the books are on the shelf. And it's true, he is that. And I like the fact he's always gone after really interesting things. Sometimes they work out really well, the record company or the airlines. Sometimes they don't, like the cola he introduced or, Virgin Brides and things like this. They just don't quite hit. But, he tries new things. He puts them to market. If you don't test it out or experiment, you're never going to do anything. It just exists on a piece of paper. So we don't have
Yeah.
Richard Branson yet, and we are compiling a list of all of our guests' favorite entrepreneurs and stuff. So I'm delighted we have somebody new for that as well. Who's your most inspiring person in life?
Ooh, I'm going to go back and say Mel Robbins here.
Okay.
Simply because, well, we could do a whole episode on Mel Robbins, I swear. Mel Robbins, because she has been so incredibly outspoken and unapologetic,
Yeah.
not only about her own mental health struggles, but in the ways in which she took that and used that as a catalyst to build her own personal brand and to help millions of people.
Yeah.
And the other thing I love about Mel Robbins and is so inspiring to me about her is the fact that she is, I don't know how old she is exactly, right? But she had a number of different careers before she became the Mel Robbins, right? And created the 5-second rule. But I think sometimes, again, we think like, oh, it's too late for me to start this, right? And I can probably say that Mel Robbins was firmly in her 40s.
Yeah.
Before she even got to this point where she was writing the 5-second rule. So it's like, she's such a wonderful reminder and inspiration that you don't have to be 21 and like feel like, oh, I've hit whatever age, like I'm done for now. Right. Like she's amazing for that.
That's really great. And like you said, it's never too late to start it, really. How many people do you meet who actually have got it? Life experience, you build on that, then you can take it. We all wish we had the $1 million idea at like 18, 21, whatever, but we all click in at some point, that's a natural fit as well. If you, let's put this from the prism of the solo entrepreneurs listening to this, the person who's maybe looking to start, run or grow a business. Are there any kind of business books or online resources or books that would inspire that you would recommend? A couple for our solopreneur bookshelf, say?
Absolutely. Two come to mind immediately. The first one I want to say is Profit First by Mike Michalowicz.
Okay.
I believe that's how you pronounce it. I think it's Michalowicz. Yeah. That book is a absolutely must read for any small business owner, but any solopreneur especially. And, without giving too much away here, what his main message is, like, you have to set aside money for your profit and you have to set aside money to pay yourself.
Yeah.
And then once you've taken out those two factors, that's when you start factoring in how much you're going to calculate for your operating expenses, not the other way around. You don't pay yourself last, you pay yourself first. And I think that's a huge trap that solopreneurs can fall into, is like, we just bleed our capital into our own business, or like we're using savings and it's like, we burn out and our business dies. So that Mike Michalowicz, Profit First. Yeah,
you're right. So many people I meet and they forget to pay themselves first. And, why are they doing it then? It's just a constant, like, oh, I'll pay myself one day down the line. You've got to get some balance. Even if you're only paying yourself a small wage to survive, it's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Because it's the principle of it, I think, if nothing else. Right. And the other last one that I'll say, and this is more personal finance, but I think it's amazing if you're a business owner, is Ramit Sethi's book, and it's spelled Sethi. I think it's called I Will Teach You to Be Rich.
Okay.
Again, and what I love about that is it's not just a book about personal finance. It's a whole philosophy about living a quote unquote rich life. And that means something different to everyone. So there's it's a little bit more philosophical take on personal finance. So those are the two that I would recommend.
I love this. This is episode 11, I think we're recording today, and two brand new books for our library as well, which is great. So very, very happy about that as well. If there was one thing that you could do over and over again in your business to make it grow, what would be that one thing, do you think you could kind of nail down? Like if you're only allowed to do one thing to make it grow, what would you do?
That's a really tough question. If there's one thing that I could do over and over to make it grow. So I'll tell you what I love doing within my own business. I love reaching out to people via personal video. There's a really great little piece of software called Loom, and you can embed it in your
we use Loom ourselves.
Yeah, it's great. It's not the most scalable model, but again, it kind of depends on what your offer is. But if you're doing, higher end consulting, one-to-one consulting, I think it's really great. I love reaching out to prospects with a personal video, and they know that, like, I'm saying their name, like I'm talking about them. It's a way in which we can remind our potential clients, prospects, leads that we are really thinking about them.
Yeah.
And I've had great luck with it. It's not super scalable. But for me, it's like, I'd much rather do that than be writing a social media post.
I
That's
love
just
that.
me.
Oh no, I love that. I mean, but like you said, it's not like, okay, if you were selling McDonald's hamburgers at 99 cents, it wouldn't make sense for you to send personal videos, unless people were buying in bulk. But if it's high-end clients who actually are going to end up being the whales, if you will, the people who are going to pay the big bucks, perfect. Even if you do 10, 15, 20 personal ones, you get one or two, amazing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love that tip. That's great. We haven't had anything like that come up. So very, very happy with that. What keeps you motivated on a daily basis?
Yeah, that's
What's your
such a great
motivation?
question. So one thing I will say is, like, solopreneur confessions. It's so easy to become amotivated.
Yeah.
Especially when you're going it alone, right? Especially in the pandemic era, when it's like most of us probably aren't even in co-working spaces right now. The one thing that really keeps me motivated is knowing that if I show up, if I allow my voice to be heard, whether it's through a podcast, whether it's being a guest on someone else's pod,
Yeah.
that's going to help people.
Yeah.
If I get my message right, that's going to help others.
Yeah.
And so when I have days where I feel a bit stinky about my own business, because let's be honest, we all do. And some days you're like, why am I doing this? I have to take the flashlight off myself, right? And go, it's not about you. It's not about me. It's about helping people out there. And when I think about the ways in which I am able to help people because I've put my voice out there, and then allowing them, it's this like beautiful positive circle of energy, right? Because it's like, if I put my voice out there, I can hopefully inspire others to do the same, and it goes on and on and on. And that's what keeps me going and keeps me showing up.
And that's great because, again, it's not just monetary, like it always has to be a much deeper reason for doing this. And, I guess everything you do, it makes an impact in the world, like you help 5, 10, 15, 20 new podcasts get off the ground and launch and do new things. There's a lot going out there. And like you said, if you don't turn up and give your best side to that, then these people might not, again, develop into someone who's their best themselves as well.
Right.
As an entrepreneur, what does success ultimately mean to you?
Yes, that's really good. Success, I have found, it's kind of like we were saying, it's not ultimately about the money. Hopefully, you get to a point in your business where you're like, this is amazing. I am making money hand over fist. But it has to be, I think, what I would say is it's defining what it means for me to live every day and being able to set my own rules, being able to set my agenda, my schedule, and really, I suppose, living in harmony with sort of the way in which, like, I want to naturally work, the way that my body wants to work, etc. I get to set the rules on that, which is ultimately terrifying on a level, because you can also then not show up for yourself in a lot of ways. But what I define is as successful, or my business being a success, is, yes, knowing that I am the one that is ultimately the commander of my own ship.
Yeah.
And I'm the one that can, like, make this puppy cruise, or I'm the one that can never set it sail from the dock, but it's all up to me.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Yeah. And that's it, freedom and the metaphors as well. Very, very cool. For those people going out there and thinking about taking the plunge to start something, like ultimately, what advice do you think you would give to them?
About just getting into starting a business?
Just starting any business. Yeah. Like if they're just sitting on the fence thinking, oh, I really want to do it. Like, what advice would you give them, in terms of, is it going to be the traditional, like, just go for it? Or is it going to be you need to learn from this? Like what would your thoughts be?
I would say, before you invest a dime into anything, go out and validate your idea.
Yeah.
And I know it's like the oldest lesson in the book, right? But I think your listeners now know that, like, I didn't probably validate my idea enough with working with the single guys. And I did have clients and stuff, but it wasn't like that true thing that people really wanted. So If you are thinking about starting a business, go out, pound the pavement, so to speak,
Yeah.
speak to 100 people in your target market, right? Okay, so
Mm,
one, figure out who you want to help.
mm,
Really think about that person, think about that avatar, and then go out and start targeting those people
mm.
and saying, hey, I have this cool idea. What do you think?
Yeah.
Or start a beta group, right? Like, and it doesn't have to be crazy intensive, right? Because you're
Mm,
giving free value, but all these are different ways in which you can validate your idea before you commit too much time, invest too much capital, and then get down to a point where you're like, oh wait, this business isn't working. Why is that? So that would be my advice. Validate your idea.
yeah. And that's great because, it's a nice counterbalance, because some people say that. Some people just like, just go for it. It'll figure itself out. So
Mm,
this is good advice, but again, validating is so important. Almost like doing that due diligence before you commit to actually going into it. Because like you said, every dime that's wasted before you've kind of got to a point, you can kind of pre-qualify some of this work, obviously, before you obviously put it to
yeah.
market. Um,
Yeah.
Say I bump into you in the street in a few years' time. Hopefully, I'll see you before that. But
Me too.
what's the dream outcome? Like where do you see your business in a few years' time? If I see you and I say, "How's the business going? Where do you want to be?"
I would love to be at a point where I am holding supper clubs and retreats
Mm,
for solopreneurs, small businesses who are really, again, looking to start their messaging, to hone their personal brand,
yeah,
and effectively get out of their own way, get away from that sense of imposter syndrome, and to start. So that, I think, is, yes, the ultimate goal, because I love connecting people,
yeah,
and I love sitting around a dinner table and just having great conversations, and that kind of like casual organic networking that happens from that, but we can't really do that right now. So
yeah,
that is where I would love to be. And then, yeah, I mean, if I could get paid effectively to like fly myself and a number of clients to the Caymans
yeah,
for like a week, and we say this really amazing resort, and we do this amazing workshopping on personal
yeah.
branding and messaging, like would be clutch,
Sign
Jonny.
me up. I'm joining. I'm there. Let me get on Skyscanner and look for Cayman Islands later on. So
Yeah,
we'll
yeah,
meet
exactly.
halfway.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, so much great advice there, Bethany. Like, I'm absolutely delighted to have you on the show today. I mean, not only have you got a great story, especially coming out of COVID as well. Obviously, there's been so many actionable tips. I really like a lot of this rapid fire round answers you've given. So much advice we're going to be able to share with solopreneurs all over the world and people who are thinking of starting that business. Can you just remind everybody, like, where they could find you online? Where do you want to point people towards where you live?
Absolutely. Yes. So you can find me at atelierwrede.com, and I'll spell that out because I know it's
Yeah,
half French,
probably
half
best.
German, which,
Yeah.
oh yeah, here's another tip, right? Like, maybe when you're creating a business name, create a business name that people can actually pronounce and aren't like, what? So that's
Yeah.
ATELIERWREDE.com.
Yeah.
And my course you can find also at courses.atelierwrede.com.
Yeah.
And then I'm on Instagram at Atelier Wrede, and I'm on Clubhouse
Yeah.
at Bethany Wrede.
Brilliant. That's amazing. And we will link to this obviously on our YouTube channel and also on our blog that we'll make from this as well, which is really, really cool. So that just makes me say thank you, Bethany, for joining us today from Atelier Wrede and obviously the Arrive podcast. We've really enjoyed having you on the Go Solo show today. So many great tips to share with the world. And obviously, good luck for the future as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jonny, for having me on the show today. It's been a real treat to get to
Yeah.
chat with you today.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Thanks a lot, Bethany. Have a great day. Take care.
And you.
See you
Thank
soon.
you.
Bye.
Bye.